That is how she learns to behave. Those words made my blood run cold. It has been 3 years since that moment, and I can still hear the echo of that applause. The applause of a mother watching her son slap my daughter across the face. The applause that followed 3 strikes that shattered everything I thought I knew about the life Ruth had built. My name is Linda Smith. I am 57 years old. I am a family law attorney specializing in domestic violence and custody battles. I have spent 32 years in courtrooms fighting for women who had lost their voices. I have gone head-to-head with abusive husbands who thought money could silence their victims. I have faced judges who dismissed bruises as accidents and prosecutors who called traumatized women unreliable. I have pulled children from homes where violence was called discipline and terror was called love. But nothing, absolutely nothing, in my 3 decades of practice prepared me to watch my own daughter be struck in front of me while her husband cheered and his mother clapped like she was watching a performance she had choreographed herself. This is the story I never imagined I would have to tell. The story of how one Sunday dinner unraveled a carefully constructed lie, and how 30 seconds of silence became the longest and most important half-minute of my life. Because those 30 seconds were not shock. They were not paralysis. They were calculation. They forgot who they were dealing with. They thought I was just another woman they could intimidate into silence. They did not know that I do not make threats. I make calls. Let me take you back to that evening. It was Sunday, April 14th. I remember the date because it was my late husband David's birthday. He had passed 2 years earlier from complications after a stroke that came without warning, leaving me alone in our home that still echoed with memories of his laughter and the smell of his terrible attempts at Sunday pancakes. Ruth, my only daughter, had called me that morning. "Mom, you cannot spend Dad's birthday alone. Come to dinner tonight. I am making his favorite. That pot roast, he always said, was better than his mother's." Ruth, my Ruth, 32 years old, brilliant civil engineer, sharp as a blade, with her father's quiet determination and my refusal to back down from a challenge. Or so I had always believed. I arrived at her house at 7 in the evening. It was a stunning property in the hills. The kind of place David had always dreamed of buying, but never got the chance to see. She and John had purchased it a year ago, using part of the inheritance I had given her. My accountant had warned me. "Mrs. Smith, perhaps we should structure this as a trust." "Just some protection in case..." "In case what?" I had snapped at him. "In case my daughter marries someone who turns out to be a predator?" I should have listened. When I arrived, the table was already prepared. Linen napkins folded into perfect triangles. Crystal stemware catching the candlelight. The smell of rosemary and garlic filled the air, mixed with fresh bread and roasted vegetables. For a moment, I was transported back to our old kitchen, watching David sneak bites of meat before dinner was ready, Ruth giggling as she set the table. But something was wrong. Ruth was different. Her hair was cut shorter than I remembered, barely brushing her shoulders in a style that felt controlled rather than chosen. She wore a cream turtleneck despite the warmth of April. And when she hugged me at the door, I felt her body go rigid, every muscle tightening as though bracing for impact. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" "Of course, Mom. Just tired from the project at work." I should have pushed. I should have asked the questions I had asked 1,000 clients. But I did not. Because standing behind her was John, smiling that smile I had never quite trusted. The kind of smile that was too practiced, too deliberate. "Linda, so wonderful to see you. Please, come in. Ruth's been cooking all afternoon." And behind him, like a storm cloud that had settled into human form, stood his mother, Helen, 64 years old, a widow whose husband had died in a fall down the stairs of their home 10 years ago. The investigation had been closed quickly, too quickly. Accidental death, they said. I had met her at the wedding, and even then, something in her eyes had set off every alarm I had spent 3 decades learning to trust. But Ruth had been so happy that day, radiant. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Another mistake I will carry for the rest of my life. Linda, darling, Helen said, her voice dripping with false warmth. What a blessing to have you join us. Ruth worked so hard on this meal. My son is fortunate to have such a dutiful wife. Dutiful? As if Ruth were staff in her own home. The home she had bought with her inheritance. The home that should have been her sanctuary. We sat down to eat. John at the head of the table, naturally. Helen to his right. Me across from her. And Ruth. Ruth sat between her husband and her mother-in-law, hemmed in on both sides like prey caught between predators. The meal began in a silence that felt wrong. Too controlled. Too tense. Helen dominated the conversation, talking endlessly about her bridge club, her redecorating plans, how lovely it was that John had moved so close to her after years apart. I ate quietly, but I was watching Ruth's hands tremble as she passed dishes. Watching John ignore her completely, not even a thank you when she refilled his wine. Watching Helen critique every single thing with surgical precision. This roast is a touch dry, don't you think, John? In my day, wives knew to check the temperature every 20 minutes. The potatoes could use more butter. These rolls are store-bought, aren't they? I can always tell. And with every quiet jab, Ruth shrank. My strong, confident daughter folded into herself like paper being crumpled slowly in a fist. Then it happened. Ruth reached across the table to refill John's water glass. Her hand shook. Just slightly. A single drop of water fell onto the white linen tablecloth. The silence that followed felt like the air had been sucked from the room. John set down his fork slowly. The sound of silver hitting porcelain rang out like a gunshot. Ruth, he said, his voice so calm it was terrifying. Look at what you have done. My daughter opened her mouth, an apology already forming, but he did not let her speak. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, though I know it lasted only seconds. John stood from his chair, and then his hand came down across Ruth's face. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound of flesh striking flesh echoed through the dining room like thunder. Ruth fell from her chair. Her body hit the floor hard. And then I heard it. The applause. Helen was clapping, actually clapping, her hands coming together in rhythmic approval. That is how she learns to behave, Helen said, her smile serene and satisfied. A clumsy wife needs correction. I had to teach my husband the same way. It is for her own good. For 30 seconds, I did not move. I did not breathe. 32 years of fighting for women in Ruth's exact position, and I could not react when it was my own daughter bleeding on the marble floor. But those 30 seconds were not paralysis. They were something else entirely. In my mind, I was processing everything with the cold precision of someone who had seen the scene play out in 100 different homes. The disproportionate reaction, the casual brutality, the complicit family member. The way Ruth had not seemed surprised, only resigned. This was not the first time. I stood slowly. John looked at me with that smug, arrogant expression, waiting for me to scream, to cry, to fall apart the way he probably expected emotional women to behave. But I did not scream. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My hands did not shake, not once. And I dialed a number I had kept on speed dial for 20 years. Captain Morrison, I said, my voice so cold it surprised even me. This is Linda Smith. I need an immediate response unit at 428 Hillcrest Drive. Domestic violence in progress with witnesses. I am activating recording now. I pressed the speaker button, set the phone on the table, and looked directly into John's eyes. Say it again, I said. Tell me again what your mother just said. Please. I have all evening. John's face drained of color in seconds. From flushed arrogance to bone-white fear. You cannot... I am a family law attorney with 32 years of experience in domestic violence cases, I said, each word precise and deliberate. I have prosecuted 215 men exactly like you. I have direct lines to the district attorney's office and every family court judge in this county. And you just assaulted my daughter in front of me while your mother applauded and justified violence, making her a legal accomplice. I walked over to Ruth, knelt beside her carefully, checked her face, her neck, her arms for injuries beyond the obvious. "Mom," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Quiet, sweetheart. I am doing the talking now." John took a step toward me, his fists clenched. I held up one hand without even looking at him. "If you touch me, that is assault on a witness, attempted intimidation, and obstruction of justice. 3 additional felonies. Please, make my job easier. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning of that evening, before everything shattered. Before I understood what I was really looking at. Sunday dinners had always been sacred in our family. When David was alive, it was our ritual, our anchor in a chaotic world. The smell of roasting meat, the sound of silverware on china, the warmth of being together. It represented safety, tradition, home. I thought Ruth was continuing that tradition. I thought she was building the same foundation David and I had built for her. I was wrong. She was not building anything. She was surviving. The house itself should have been my first clue. From the outside, it was perfect. Professionally landscaped gardens, elegant stone facade, the kind of home that appeared in luxury real estate magazines. But when Ruth opened the door, I noticed how her eyes darted past me to the street, as if checking whether anyone had seen me arrive. As if my presence required explanation. "Come in, Mom. Dinner is almost ready." The interior was immaculate. Too immaculate. The kind of clean that speaks not of care, but of fear. Every cushion perfectly placed. Every surface gleaming. No clutter, no personality, no evidence that anyone actually lived there. It felt like a showroom, like a museum where touching anything would set off an alarm. The dining room was stunning. A long mahogany table that could seat 12. A crystal chandelier that caught the evening light and threw fragments of gold across the walls. Fresh flowers and a centerpiece that looked professionally arranged. The table was set with china I recognized, the set I had given Ruth as a wedding gift. Each plate positioned exactly 1 inch from the edge of the table. The pot roast sat at the center, surrounded by roasted vegetables glistening with olive oil, a basket of bread wrapped in linen, a gravy boat that steamed gently. The smell should have made my mouth water. Instead, it made my stomach tighten, because I was watching Ruth move around that table like she was walking through a minefield. Her shoulders were drawn up toward her ears. Her movements were quick and precise, almost mechanical. When she placed a serving spoon next to the roast, she adjusted it 3 times until it was perfectly parallel to the platter. Her breathing was shallow, controlled. "Sweetheart, can I help with anything?" No. Everything is ready. Please sit." Helen was already seated, of course. She had positioned herself in what should have been my chair, the one to the right of the head of the table. The power position, the one closest to whoever sat at the head. She smiled at me as I hesitated. "Oh, Linda, you sit there," she said, gesturing to the chair directly across from her. "John likes Ruth next to him. Do not you, darling?" John entered then, still in his work clothes. Expensive suit, crisp white shirt, cufflinks that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He did not acknowledge Ruth, did not compliment the meal she had spent hours preparing. He simply walked to the head of the table and sat down as if it were a throne. "This looks acceptable," he said. "Ruth, wine. Not a request, a command. No, please. No, thank you. Waiting on the other side." Ruth moved immediately, reaching for the bottle of red on the sideboard. Her hand trembled slightly as she poured. I watched a mother's instinct warring with a lawyer's training in my chest. The lawyer in me recognized the dynamic instantly. Dominance, submission, control masked as preference. But the mother in me wanted to believe I was overreacting, reading too much into simple dinner table arrangements, seeing patterns where there were none. Ruth sat down in the only remaining chair, the one between John and Helen. Trapped, though I did not let myself use that word then. Helen led us in grace, her voice syrupy and performative. Bless this food, bless this family, bless my son for his hard work and his wife for her service. Service, not partnership, not love. Service. Shall we eat? John said, and we began. For the first 10 minutes, I tried to make conversation. I asked Ruth about her work, about the bridge project I knew she was overseeing. But every time she opened her mouth to answer, John interrupted. That project is behind schedule. Budget issues. Ruth has been struggling with the contractors. Ruth's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. I asked about their recent vacation, a trip to the coast I had seen photos of online. Again, John answered. The hotel was adequate. Ruth forgot to pack my running shoes, so I had to buy new ones. He said it casually, but there was an edge underneath, an accusation. Ruth stared at her plate. Helen joined in, her criticisms dressed up as concern. Ruth, darling, you look tired. Are you getting enough sleep? You know, when I was your age, I made sure to always look fresh for my husband. A wife's appearance reflects on her husband's status. Ruth nodded. I will try to do better. The words made my blood run cold. I will try to do better. As if existing in her own skin required improvement. As if her worth was measured by someone else's approval. The lawyer in me was screaming now. Every instinct I had honed over 3 decades was firing. I had seen this before. The isolation, the criticism, the way Ruth was diminishing herself bite by bite. But I pushed it down. This was my daughter, my family. I could not be objective. I was seeing shadows where there was only candlelight, or so I told myself. Helen continued her assault, each comment a small blade wrapped in velvet. The roast is a touch dry, dear. Perhaps next time, less time in the oven. And these potatoes, they could use more butter. In my time, we learned to cook from our mothers. But I suppose your generation is too busy with careers to learn domestic skills properly. Ruth absorbed each comment like blows, her posture shrinking incrementally with each word. I wanted to say something, wanted to defend her, but John was watching me with an expression I could not quite read. Challenging me, daring me to interfere in his household. So I stayed silent. Another mistake. The meal dragged on. John spoke about his work, his accomplishments, his importance. He did not ask me a single question, did not acknowledge that I, too, had a career, had built something meaningful. To him, I was simply Ruth's mother, an audience. And through it all, Ruth said almost nothing. She served. She cleared plates. She refilled glasses before they were empty. She apologized. I am sorry the bread is not warmer. I am sorry I forgot the butter dish. I am sorry. I felt my throat tightening. This was not the daughter I had raised. This was not the woman who had graduated top of her class, who had stood up to professors twice her age, who had laughed loudly and loved fiercely. This was someone else. Someone I did not recognize. And then, as Helen launched into another story about her country club, as John cut his meat with aggressive precision, Ruth reached across the table for the water pitcher. Her hand was shaking. If you want to see what happens when that water spills, and trust me, what comes next will shock you, make sure you're subscribed. Like this video and hit that notification bell, because the next chapter changes everything. I don't make threats. I make calls. Her hand was shaking. I watched as Ruth lifted the crystal pitcher, the water inside catching the chandelier light, like liquid diamonds. She reached across the table toward John's glass, her movements careful, deliberate. Too careful, the kind of careful that comes from practice, from consequences. The pitcher tilted. Water began to pour. Then everything slowed down. Her hand trembled. Just once. Just enough. The stream of water missed the rim of John's glass by half an inch. A single drop hit the white linen tablecloth. Then another. Maybe 3 drops total, barely enough to darken the fabric. But I watched those drops spread like blood across gauze. Watched them seep into the expensive linen. Watched them create a stain no bigger than a quarter. The sound of the pitcher returning to the table seemed to echo. Glass on wood. Final. Damning. And then silence. Not the comfortable silence of people enjoying a meal. Not the peaceful quiet of family. This was something else entirely. This was the silence before violence. The silence prey animals recognize on instinct. The silence that makes your hindbrain scream run. Ruth froze. Her entire body went rigid. She did not look at the spill. She looked at John, watching, waiting. John placed his fork on his plate with deliberate precision. The silver touched porcelain with a soft click that somehow sounded like a gunshot in that silent room. He folded his napkin carefully, set it beside his plate. Each movement was controlled, choreographed, terrifying in its calmness. "Ruth," he said, his voice so quiet I had to strain to hear it. "Do you see what you have done?" His tone was not angry. That would have been easier. Anger can be confronted. Anger burns hot and fast. This was cold, calculated. This was a man who knew exactly what he was about to do, and had done it before. "John, I am so sorry. I will get a cloth. She did not get to finish. He stood from his chair slowly, like a judge rising to deliver a sentence. Ruth's apology died in her throat. She knew what was coming. I could see it in her eyes. The resignation, the fear, the terrible, learned helplessness. And then his hand moved. The first slap caught her across the left cheek with a crack that made me flinch. Ruth's head snapped to the side. Before she could recover, the second blow came from the other direction. Right cheek. Her lips split. I saw blood. The third strike was harder than the first two combined. It caught her temple, and Ruth went down like her legs had been cut out from under her. She hit the marble floor hard. I heard the impact, heard the sound of bone and flesh meeting stone. She did not scream, did not cry out, just crumpled like she had been expecting this, like her body knew how to fall to minimize damage. And then, cutting through my shock like a knife, I heard it. Applause. Slow, deliberate, mocking. Helen was clapping, her manicured hands coming together in rhythmic approval. Her face was serene, satisfied. Like she was watching a child finally learn to tie their shoes. That is how she learns to behave, Helen said, her voice warm with approval. A clumsy wife needs correction. I had to teach my husband the same way. It is for her own good, really. Some women simply do not learn without proper discipline. My daughter was on the floor, bleeding, and this woman was applauding. For 30 seconds, I could not move, could not breathe, could not process what I had just witnessed. 30 seconds where my brain simply refused to accept what my eyes had seen. My daughter, my brilliant, beautiful daughter, beaten like an animal for spilling water. But those 30 seconds were not shock. They were not paralysis. They were calculation. In those 30 seconds, my lawyer brain activated with the cold precision of a surgical instrument. I was processing evidence, documenting, cataloging. Every detail was being filed away in the part of my mind that had prosecuted over 200 domestic violence cases. The disproportionate response. 3 slaps for 3 drops of water. The practiced nature of the violence. John knew exactly how hard to hit, where to strike, how to make it hurt without breaking bones. This was not rage. This was method. Ruth's reaction. She had not been surprised, had not fought back, had not screamed. She had simply fallen, like she had been trained. Helen's response, not shock, not horror, approval, coaching. This was not the first time she had witnessed this. She had probably encouraged it, taught it, perfected it with her own husband before he mysteriously fell down those stairs. And the most damning detail of all, the way Ruth was crying. silent tears streaming down her face as she pressed her palm against her bleeding mouth. Not the tears of someone experiencing violence for the first time. These were the tears of someone who had learned that making noise only made it worse. This was not the first time. This was a pattern, a system, a carefully maintained structure of control and punishment that had been happening for God knows how long, while I sat in my empty house thinking my daughter was happy. The 30 seconds ended. I stood up from my chair, slowly, deliberately. Every eye in the room turned to me. John looked at me with that arrogant smile still playing at the corners of his mouth. He was waiting for me to scream, to cry, to fall apart the way he had probably watched Ruth fall apart 100 times before. He was waiting for emotion, for hysteria, for the predictable response of a frightened woman. Helen's expression was more guarded. Something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe, like she suddenly remembered exactly who I was. What I did for a living. But I said nothing, not yet. I simply stood there, my hands steady at my sides, my mind already 3 moves ahead, and reached into my purse. What happens when a family law attorney with 32 years of experience watches her daughter get beaten? You're about to find out. Like and subscribe, because the next chapter is when they realize they picked the wrong mother to cross. This is where I make the call that changes everything. My hand closed around my phone. The weight of it felt solid, grounding. Real in a way nothing else in that room felt real. I pulled it from my purse with movements so calm they surprised even me. My hands did not shake, not once. 32 years of walking into courtrooms had taught me that emotion is a weapon your opponents use against you. Control is power, and I was about to show them what power looked like. I unlocked my phone, opened my contacts, and pressed a number I had kept in speed dial for 2 decades. "Captain Morrison," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "This is Linda Smith. I need an immediate response unit at 428 Hillcrest Drive. Domestic violence in progress with multiple witnesses. I am activating recording now." John's smile faltered. Just slightly. Just enough. I pressed the speaker button, set the phone on the table between the breadbasket and the gravy boat. The red recording indicator glowed like an accusation. "You cannot," John started. "I am a family law attorney with 32 years of experience in domestic violence prosecution," I said, each word precise and deliberate. "I have direct lines to the district attorney's office and every family court judge in this county. You just assaulted my daughter in front of me. That is felony domestic battery, and your mother applauded. That makes her an accessory and accomplice to assault." I looked at Helen. She was still sitting, but her smile had frozen on her face like a mask that no longer fit properly. "Mrs. Morgan," I said, my voice clinically polite, "could you please repeat what you said after your son struck my daughter?" "For the record." Helen's eyes darted to John, back to me. She was calculating, trying to determine if this was a bluff. "I have no idea what you said. That is how she learns to behave. A clumsy wife needs correction. I had to teach my husband the same way. It is for her own good." "Those were your exact words." "Said while applauding violence." "I need you to confirm whether you stand by that statement." The room had gone silent again, but this was different. This silence belonged to me. "It was discipline," Helen said, her voice defensive now, "not violence. A husband has a right to correct his wife when she embarrasses him. When I was married." "So you are confirming that you believe physical striking constitutes acceptable discipline, and that you witnessed your son strike my daughter 3 times. And you approved?" Helen's mouth opened, closed. She was trapped, and she knew it. I turned to John. He was standing now, his hands clenched at his sides. The arrogance was cracking. Underneath, I could see something else. Fear. "You have nothing," he said, but his voice wavered. "This is our home. Ruth is my wife. You are interfering in a private family matter. Private, I repeated, the word sharp as broken glass. You committed felony assault in front of 2 witnesses, one of whom is an officer of the court. The other who just confessed on recording to being a knowing accomplice. There is nothing private about crimes. I walked to Ruth, knelt beside her carefully. Her face was swelling already, her lips still bleeding. I took photos with my phone. Each bruise, each mark, each tear track. Mom, Ruth whispered, please. Quiet, sweetheart. I am doing the talking now. I have been silent too long. John took a step toward me. His fists were clenched. If you touch me, I said without even looking at him, that is assault on a witness, attempted intimidation, and obstruction of justice. 3 additional felonies. Please, make my job easier. He stopped, frozen mid-step like someone had pressed pause on his rage. And then, cutting through the terrible silence, I heard them. Sirens. Distant at first. Then closer, growing louder. The sound of justice approaching at 70 miles per hour. John's face went from red to white in seconds. You called them before you even came inside, did not you? This was a setup. No, I said calmly. I called them 30 seconds ago. Captain Morrison knows me well enough to respond immediately when I use the words domestic violence in progress. I have sent him over 200 cases. He trusts my judgment. The sirens were right outside now. Blue and red lights flashed through the dining room windows, painting the walls in alternating shades of authority. You cannot do this, Helen said, standing now, her composure cracking like porcelain. John is a respected professional. This will ruin him. Good, I said simply. The doorbell rang. Then heavy knocking. Police. Open the door. I walked to the entrance and let them in. 4 officers. Captain Morrison himself leading them. He took one look at Ruth on the floor, blood on her face, and his expression hardened. Mrs. Smith. Captain. The male subject struck the victim 3 times. The older female subject applauded and verbally endorsed the violence, stating it was discipline she had practiced on her own husband. Both statements are recorded. The victim requires medical evaluation. The next 15 minutes happened efficiently. Clinically, John was handcuffed first. He protested, loudly, about his rights, his reputation, his connections. None of it mattered. Helen tried tears, tried explanations, tried claiming she had been joking. The recording said otherwise. They were both placed in separate patrol cars. An EMT examined Ruth while I held her hand. She was shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off, reality setting in. I am so sorry, Mom. I should have told you. I should have. You have nothing to apologize for, I said firmly. Nothing. Do you understand me? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Pack a bag, I told her. You are coming home with me. Tonight. We left that house 20 minutes later. Ruth carried a single suitcase. Everything else I told her, we would get with a police escort later. She did not look back as we drove away. I watched the house disappear in my rearview mirror. Watched the police tape going up. Watched the neighbors gathering on their perfect lawns, whispering about the scandal. And I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Because this, I knew, was only the beginning. They thought a mother would be too emotional to fight back. They forgot I've been fighting men like them for 32 years. Like and subscribe to see what happens when power tries to fight back, and why they should have been more afraid of the call I made. The Rhea War is just starting. We drove in silence. Ruth sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the darkness rushing past. Her reflection in the glass showed a face I barely recognized. Swollen, bruised, broken in ways that went deeper than skin. When we arrived at my house, the house she had grown up in, she stood in the doorway like she was visiting a museum of her former life. Everything was exactly as she remembered. Her father's reading chair, the photos on the mantel, the smell of lavender from the candles I still burned. I made tea. We sat in the kitchen where she had done homework at this same table, where David had taught her to calculate compound interest, where we had laughed over burned pancakes and celebrated straight A report cards. She wrapped her hands around the mug but did not drink. "Tell me," I said gently. "Tell me everything." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, almost whisper soft, she began. "It was not always like this." "I know, sweetheart. When we first got married, John was perfect. Attentive, romantic. He bought me flowers every Friday, left notes on my pillow, told me I was brilliant, that he was lucky to have me. The first 6 months felt like a fairy tale. The honeymoon phase, I said. They always start there." Ruth nodded. Then small things started changing. He'd suggested I did not need to see my college friends as much. Said they were bad influences, too loud, too inappropriate. When I went to dinner with them anyway, he sulked for days. Made me feel guilty for choosing them over him. "Isolation," I said, the word bitter on my tongue. Then he wanted access to my bank accounts. "For transparency," he said. "For trust. So we could plan our future together." I thought it was romantic. I gave him access to everything. The inheritance, my salary, everything. She paused, her voice cracking. Within 3 months, I had no idea what was in my own accounts. He controlled every purchase, questioned every transaction. If I bought coffee without telling him, he accused me of hiding things, of being untrustworthy, financial manipulation, I whispered. Classic pattern. Ruth's tears started falling now, silent and steady. And Helen. God, Helen was there from the beginning, coaching him, teaching him. I heard them once, in the kitchen. She was telling him that a wife needs boundaries, that I was too independent, too headstrong, that her husband had been the same way before she trained him properly. Trained, I repeated, feeling sick. She told him that a man who cannot control his wife is not a man at all. That discipline was an act of love, that I would thank him one day when I became the wife he deserved. My hands were shaking now. I gripped my own mug tighter. How long, Ruth? How long has he been hitting you? 6 months after the wedding, she said, her voice hollow. The first time was because I laughed too loudly at a party. He said I embarrassed him, made him look weak in front of his colleagues. When we got home, he slapped me once. Then he cried, apologized, swore it would never happen again, bought me diamond earrings the next day. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. And for a while, it stopped. But then it happened again, and again, each time with a reason. I spoke out of turn. I wore the wrong dress. I forgot to buy his favorite wine. I burned dinner. I breathed wrong. She was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. And every time he convinced me it was my fault, that I was clumsy, thoughtless, that any other man would have left me already, that I was lucky he stayed, lucky he loved me enough to correct me. Gaslighting, I said, my voice breaking. He made you question your own reality. I started believing him, Mom. I started thinking maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too much, too difficult. Maybe I deserved it. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see an engineer. I did not see Dad's daughter. I saw a failure, a woman who could not even pour water without messing up. I reached across the table and took her hands, felt how cold they were, how small. You are not the problem. You never were. This is what abusers do. They break you down so slowly, you do not realize you are being dismantled piece by piece until there is nothing left but the version of you they created. I should have told you, she whispered, but I was ashamed. You are this incredible attorney who saves women like me. How could I admit that I could not save myself, that I let this happen? The guilt hit me like a physical blow. My own daughter had been suffering, and I had missed it. Missed the signs I was trained to recognize. The long sleeves, the flinching, the over-apologizing, the way she had stopped calling as often, stopped visiting, stopped being Ruth. I missed it too, I said, my voice thick. I should have seen it. I should have known. He was careful, Ruth said. The bruises were always where clothes could hide them. The insults were always in private. In public, he was the perfect husband. Attentive, loving. Everyone thought we were the ideal couple. She looked at me then, her eyes hollow and haunted. Helen told me once that this was tradition, that her mother did it to her father, that her grandmother did it to her grandfather, that strong women have always had to discipline weak men. She said it like it was something to be proud of, like she was passing down wisdom. Generational abuse, I said, the pieces clicking into place. Helen learned this from someone, practiced it on her own husband, and now she was teaching John to do it to you. Ruth nodded. She said it would make me stronger. That pain builds character. That one day I would understand. We sat in silence for a moment. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, an owl called into the darkness. Then Ruth looked at me, her voice small and frightened in a way that broke my heart. Mom, she said, do you think they will stop? I thought about John's face when the handcuffs closed around his wrists. Thought about Helen's desperate attempts to explain away violence as discipline. Thought about the lawsuit they would file, the connections they would use, the system they would try to weaponize against us. I met my daughter's eyes, held her gaze with all the strength I had left. No, I said honestly, they will not stop. Men like John never do. Not when their power is threatened. Not when they lose control. They will fight back with everything they have. I watched fear bloom across her face. But so will I continued. And sweetheart, I have been doing this a lot longer than they have. This is only the beginning of their fight back. Like this video, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to see what happens when powerful people realize their victim has an even more powerful mother. Because in the next chapter, they declare war. And I've been ready for this war my entire career. I was right. They fought back. The lawsuit arrived 6 days after the arrests. Hand-delivered by a courier in an expensive suit. The envelope was thick, professionally bound. The kind of legal document designed to intimidate before you even opened it. Morgan V. Smith. Civil suit for defamation, emotional distress, malicious prosecution, and parental alienation. They were suing me for $5 million. I read it in my kitchen while Ruth slept upstairs. Her first real sleep in days. Every page was crafted to wound. They claimed I had fabricated evidence, coerced Ruth into false testimony, used my position as an attorney to manipulate law enforcement. They painted me as a vindictive mother-in-law who had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to destroy an innocent man's reputation. The lies were so polished they almost looked like truth. But it was the name at the bottom that made my blood run cold. The presiding judge assigned to the case, Honorable Richard Whitmore. I knew that name. Everyone in family law knew that name. He played golf with the city's wealthiest men. His wife sat on charity boards with Helen. He had a reputation for being old school, traditional, the kind of judge who believed a man's home was his castle. This was not random assignment. This was strategy. I called my contacts in the courthouse, asked quiet questions, got quieter answers. The case had been assigned through channels that bypassed the normal rotation. Someone had made a call, someone with connections. They were using the system against me. The same system I had spent 3 decades learning to navigate. And they were good at it. Then came the media. Local news picked up the story first. Prominent attorney accused of false allegations. The headline made it sound like I was the criminal. They interviewed John's colleagues, his neighbors, people who described him as charming, successful, a pillar of the community. They used his professional headshot, the one where he looked trustworthy and polished. Ruth's photo was from a party 5 years ago, cropped to make her look disheveled, unstable. The comments online were vicious, gold digger, manipulative, crazy. Every misogynistic slur designed to discredit abuse victims was deployed with surgical precision. They called me an ambulance chaser, a bitter divorcee weaponizing my daughter against a good man. The smear campaign was coordinated, professional, expensive. Ruth's workplace called 3 days later. Her supervisor, a man she had worked with for 6 years, suggested she take a voluntary leave of absence. For her own well-being, he said. Until the situation resolves itself, she was being forced out, punished for being a victim. Then her friends started disappearing. The calls stopped. Text messages went unanswered. Women she had known since college suddenly had excuses for why they could not meet for coffee. One finally admitted the truth over voicemail, her voice apologetic but firm. "Ruth, this is really messy. John's family is saying things. My husband works with people who know his firm. I cannot get involved. I am sorry." Ruth played me the message with hollow eyes. "Everyone believes him," she said. "They think I am lying." "No," I corrected. "They think believing you is inconvenient. There is a difference." But I could see her breaking. The isolation was surgical, deliberate. This was how abusers won. They did not just hurt you physically. They systematically destroyed everything around you, until you had nothing left to stand on. "This is what they do," I explained, my voice steady, even as my own doubts crept in. "They weaponize institutions. They use their money, their connections, their social capital to make the victim look like the perpetrator. They turn the justice system into another tool of abuse." "But you know the truth," Ruth said. "You saw it." "I do. But truth and justice are not the same thing, sweetheart. Sometimes the system protects the powerful instead of the vulnerable. That is why so many victims never come forward. Because this," I gestured at the lawsuit, the news articles on my laptop, the voicemails from former friends. "This is what happens when you do." I saw the defeat settling into her shoulders. Saw her starting to wonder if fighting back had been worth it. If silence might have been safer. For the first time in 32 years, I felt myself doubting. Not the truth. Never the truth, but my ability to win against a system that seemed designed to protect men like John. I thought of the judge, the media narrative, the $5 million lawsuit designed to bankrupt me into submission. I thought about the 214 cases I had won, and wondered how many others I had lost without knowing. How many women had faced the same machine and been crushed by it? I was sitting at my desk, staring at the lawsuit, when I heard Ruth's phone buzz upstairs. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Then I heard her voice, sharp with panic. "Mom." I took the stairs 2 at a time. Ruth was sitting on the edge of the guest bed, her phone in her shaking hands, her face white as bone. She turned the screen toward me. 3 messages from John. I could see them clearly. "I miss you. We can fix this. I know we can. Come home. Please. I forgive you." Ruth looked at me with eyes full of terror and something else. Something that scared me more than anything else I had seen. Hope. "Mom," she whispered. "What if he means it? What if he has changed?" And I realized we were at the most dangerous moment of all. This is when victims are most at risk. When abusers pretend to change. Like this video, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe because what happens next will determine whether Ruth survives this. The statistics on women who go back are terrifying, and John is counting on that. I miss you. We can fix this. I forgive you. The words glowed on Ruth's phone screen like poison disguised as medicine. I watched her stare at them, watched hope and terror war across her face, and felt my heart drop into my stomach. Maybe he has changed, she said again, her voice desperate. Maybe the arrest scared him, made him realize. People can change, right, Mom? You have seen it. In your cases, people change. I wanted to lie to her. Wanted to say yes, of course. Miracles happen. But I had spent 32 years in courtrooms, and I knew the statistics. I knew the patterns. I knew what happened to women who went back. So instead, I sat down beside her on the bed and told her the truth. Ruth, honey, this is called a trauma bond. It is not love. It is a psychological response to abuse. When someone hurts you and then shows you kindness, your brain releases the same chemicals as falling in love. You become addicted to the relief, to the moments when the pain stops. He sounds sincere, she whispered, reading the messages again. They always do. That is the point. He is not apologizing because he has changed. He is apologizing because he has lost control. And men like John, men who need control, will say anything to get it back. She looked at me with tears streaming down her face. But what if this time is different? What if I am throwing away a chance to save my marriage? I took her hands, held them tight. Let me tell you about 3 women. 3 cases I worked. Names changed for privacy, but every word true. Ruth nodded, her breath hitching. Sarah, 28 years old. Teacher. Her husband broke her nose. She pressed charges. He sent flowers, wrote letters. Promised therapy. She dropped the charges and went back. 6 months later, he put her in the hospital with internal bleeding. She survived. Barely. Mom. Michael. 35. Architect. His wife isolated him, controlled his money, hit him when he disobeyed. He left. She cried, begged, swore she would get help. He went back. She escalated. Last I heard, he has permanent hearing loss in one ear from where she hit him with a lamp. Ruth's hands were shaking in mine. And Jennifer, 32 years old, same age as you, engineer like you. Her husband was charming, successful, respected. He beat her for 3 years. She finally left. He sent her messages exactly like these. I miss you. I forgive you. I have changed. She went back. Ruth's voice was barely a whisper. What happened to her? She is dead, Ruth. He killed her 6 weeks after she returned. Strangled her in their bedroom. Claimed it was an accident during an argument. Got 12 years for manslaughter instead of murder because he had good lawyers and a sympathetic judge who believed it was a crime of passion. The color drained from Ruth's face. I have worked 214 cases. Do you know how many abusers genuinely changed after one arrest? After one consequence? Ruth shook her head. 3. 3 out of 214. And those 3 spent years in intensive therapy, lost everything, and rebuilt themselves from nothing. John has had 6 days. 6 days in a lawsuit designed to avoid accountability. Does that sound like change to you? But everyone says I am lying, Ruth said, her voice breaking. The judge is connected to Helen. My job is gone. My friends abandoned me. If I go back, at least I will not be alone. You will be more alone than you have ever been, I said firmly. Because you will be trapped with someone who has already shown you he will hurt you. And next time it will be worse. It always gets worse when they think they have won you back. Ruth pulled her hands away, stood up, started pacing. You do not understand. You cannot understand. You are not the one being destroyed by this. Your career is not over. Your reputation is not ruined. You are not the one everyone thinks is crazy. Her words hit like slaps, but I absorbed them. Let her rage, because rage was better than resignation. You are right, I said quietly. I do not know what it feels like to be you right now, but I do know what it feels like to watch someone you love be slowly murdered. Because that is what this is, Ruth. If you go back, I will lose you. Maybe not today, maybe not next month. But eventually, she was crying now. Full, gasping sobs that shook her entire body. I am so tired, Mom. I am so tired of fighting, of being scared, of everyone looking at me like I am broken. You are not broken, I said, standing to face her. You are wounded. There is a difference. Broken things cannot be repaired. Wounded things heal. What if I cannot heal? What if this is just who I am now? Then we figured that out together. But we do it from safety, not from inside the cage with the person who hurt you. We stood there, mother and daughter, both crying now. The silence stretched between us like a bridge we were both afraid to cross. Finally, Ruth picked up her phone. Her hands trembled so badly she almost dropped it. She opened John's messages, read them one more time. Then, with a movement so small and so huge, it felt like the world was tilting, she pressed block. The screen went dark. She collapsed then, just folded into herself like all her strings had been cut. I caught her, held her while she sobbed into my shoulder, while 3 years of pain and fear and captivity poured out of her in waves. "It is okay," I whispered into her hair. "You did it. You chose yourself." We stayed like that for a long time, until her sobs quieted into hiccups, until her breathing evened out, until she fell asleep against me, exhausted from the weight of the hardest decision she had ever made. I was lowering her onto the bed, pulling a blanket over her, when my own phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I would not answer. But something made me step into the hallway and press accept. "Linda Smith," I said quietly. "Mrs. Smith." The voice was female, young, nervous. "My name is Rebecca Torres. I am John Morgan's former assistant. I need to meet with you. Tonight, if possible." My pulse quickened. "Why?" "Because I have evidence. Emails, recordings, plans, things you need to see before that trial." "What kind of evidence?" A pause, then barely above a whisper. Proof that what happened to Ruth was not the first time. And proof that Helen has been covering up abuse for over 30 years. The hallway seemed to tilt. "Where and when?" I asked. "Everything is about to change." The evidence that could destroy them completely just walk through the door, or is it a trap? Like this video, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe because the next chapter reveals secrets that go back decades. And some secrets are worth killing to protect. We met at a diner 40 minutes outside the city, the kind of place where nobody asks questions and the coffee tastes like burnt regret. Rebecca Torres sat in a back booth, a large manila envelope clutched to her chest like a shield. She was younger than I expected, maybe 25. Her hand shook as I slid into the seat across from her. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I was not sure you would. You said you had evidence. I am listening." She glanced around the diner. The paranoia was real, justified. When you have worked for people like John, you learn to check your surroundings. "I worked as John's executive assistant for 3 years," she began. "I scheduled his meetings, managed his emails, handled his personal affairs. I saw things, heard things, but I did not understand what I was seeing until Ruth." She pushed the envelope across the table. I opened it. Inside were printouts, dozens of them, emails, text messages, bank statements, medical records, and photographs. So many photographs. The first email was from Helen to John, dated 2 years ago. "You are being too soft with her. A wife who does not fear consequences will never respect you. Remember what I taught you. Discipline must be consistent and private. Leave no marks where others can see." My stomach turned. The next was John's response. "You are right. I have been too lenient. It will not happen again." I flipped through more. Helen coaching John on how to isolate Ruth, how to control her finances, how to make her dependent, how to ensure she had nowhere to run. The emails read like an instruction manual, a generational playbook for creating a perfect victim. Then came the recordings. Rebecca had included a flash drive. I plugged it into my phone with trembling hands. Helen's voice filled my ear, cold, clinical, proud. "You must understand, John, that women like Ruth need structure. My mother taught me this. Her mother taught her. Strong women raise strong sons by breaking weak wives. It is tradition." The recording continued. Helen describing techniques, explaining how to gaslight effectively, how to use law enforcement sympathetically by appearing calm and reasonable, how to make the victim look unstable. And if it ever goes too far, she said on the recording, there are always accidents. Falls, car crashes, things that look unfortunate but natural. My blood ran cold. This recording was made 6 months ago, Rebecca said quietly. Helen did not know I was in the adjacent room during one of her coaching sessions with John. I kept reading. Found bank statements showing payments from Helen to a private investigator. They had been following Ruth, documenting her movements, building a file to use against her if she ever tried to leave. Then I found the smear campaign, all of it, documented, coordinated, emails to journalists, talking points distributed to John's colleagues, scripts for character witnesses. The entire media narrative we had been drowning in had been manufactured, pre-planned. They had written the story before Ruth ever fought back. But it was the next document that made everything click into place. A medical examiner's report, 20 years old, for Helen's husband, Richard Morgan. Cause of death: blunt force trauma from fall downstairs. Investigation concluded: accidental. But attached to it was another document, a letter. Handwritten, never submitted to authorities. From Richard Morgan's sister. I know what Helen did. Richard called me the night before he died. He was leaving her. He had hired a lawyer. He was terrified of her. She said if he left, she would destroy him. The next day, he was dead. The police believed her tears, her story. But I know what she is. The letter was dated, signed, notarized, but never investigated. Someone had buried it. Rebecca leaned forward. Richard's sister gave me that letter 3 months ago. She kept it all these years, waiting for someone who would believe her. When she heard about Ruth, about the arrest, she reached out to me. She said Helen had been doing this for decades. I kept flipping. Found more. Helen's own mother. Hospital records from the 1960s showing repeated injuries to Helen's father. Broken ribs, concussions, black eyes. All explained away as clumsiness, as accidents. The pattern went back 3 generations. This family, Rebecca whispered, has been covering up violence for 70 years. Passing down techniques, protecting each other, using money and connections to make investigations disappear. Why did you keep all this? I asked. Why risk it? Because I saw what Ruth looked like at that dinner last year. The one where she spilled wine on the tablecloth. John made me stay late to help clean up. Ruth apologized 47 times. I counted. And I saw the bruise on her wrist when her sleeve rode up. I knew then. I just did not know how to help. She paused, tears in her eyes. Then I heard about the arrest, about the lawsuit, about how they were destroying you both. I realized they were going to win unless someone exposed them. So I started copying everything, every email, every document, everything I could find before John fired me last week. He fired you? She nodded. He said I knew too much, that I was a liability. He offered me money to sign an NDA, $50,000 to forget everything I had seen. I took the money and copied everything first. I sat back, my mind racing. This was not just domestic violence anymore. This was conspiracy, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, potentially murder. This went beyond John and Helen. This implicated lawyers, investigators, possibly even the judge assigned to our case. There is more, Rebecca said, pulling out another folder. Judge Whitmore. He and Helen go way back. He was Richard Morgan's estate lawyer before he became a judge. He helped settle Richard's will quickly. Minimal investigation. He benefited financially from keeping things quiet. She showed me documents, payments, connections, a web of complicity that had protected Helen for decades. This changes everything, I said. I know. I pulled out my phone, called Captain Morrison directly. It was 2 a.m., but he answered on the second ring. Captain, I need you to listen very carefully. I have evidence of conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice, witness tampering, potential murder, and systematic abuse covering 3 generations. I need you to contact the district attorney immediately. This is bigger than domestic assault. I spent the next hour on that phone, making calls, sending files, setting machinery in motion that, once started, could not be stopped. By dawn, warrants were being issued, not just for John and Helen, but for the private investigator, for the lawyer who had helped bury evidence, for Judge Whitmore himself. The arrests happened simultaneously, coordinated. Helen was taken from her country club during breakfast with her bridge group, John from his office during a meeting with his defense attorney, Judge Whitmore from his chambers. The news broke before noon. Federal investigation into multi-generational abuse cover-up. Judge implicated in decades-long conspiracy. The story we had been living privately exploded into public consciousness. But this time, the narrative was different. This time, the truth was armed with evidence. My phone rang. District Attorney Melissa Chen. Mrs. Smith, she said, I have reviewed the evidence. We are expanding charges against Helen Morgan to include conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Richard Morgan. We are reopening that investigation. And we are looking into 4 other deaths connected to this family over the past 40 years. 4 other deaths. 4 other husbands. 4 other accidents. 4 other investigations that closed too quickly. My God. This family, Linda, has been killing with impunity for decades. And you just tore down the wall they built to hide behind. I looked at the evidence spread across my kitchen table. At Ruth, sleeping upstairs, finally safe. At the photographs of women and men across generations who had suffered under this family's cruelty. The arrests were expanding. The investigation was growing. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something that had been missing. Hope. The conspiracy goes back decades, multiple deaths, generations of cover-up. Like this video, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to see justice finally catch up to people who thought they were untouchable. Because in the next chapter, they faced the one thing they never prepared for: consequences. The courtroom was packed, media in the back rows, victims' families filling the gallery. And at the center of it all, Helen Morgan, sitting at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit that stripped away every pretense of elegance she had spent decades cultivating. Judge Whitmore had recused himself within 48 hours of his arrest. The new judge was Maria Santos, a woman I had worked with on dozens of cases. A woman who had built her career prosecuting exactly this kind of systemic abuse. The trial lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of testimony, of evidence, of truth finally being spoken aloud in a room where it could not be dismissed or buried. Rebecca testified first, described the emails, the recordings. The systematic coaching Helen had provided to John, her voice never wavered. Then came Richard Morgan's sister, now 73, who had waited 20 years to tell her story. She described the phone call from her brother the night before he died. His fear, his plans to leave, and then his body at the bottom of the stairs the next morning. 3 other families came forward. Widows and children of men who had died under suspicious circumstances. All connected to Helen's family tree. All with stories of abuse that had been silenced by money and power and strategic investigations that closed too quickly. And then Ruth took the stand. My daughter walked to that witness box with her head high. She wore a simple blue dress. No makeup to cover the fading bruises. No long sleeves to hide the scars. She let them see everything. State your name for the record. Ruth Elizabeth Smith. Her voice was clear, strong, nothing like the trembling woman who had cowered at the dinner table. She told her story, every detail, the isolation, the control, the violence, the way Helen had applauded. The way she had been taught that her pain was discipline, that her silence was duty. The defense attorney tried to break her. Asked if she had provoked John, if she had exaggerated, if she was seeking attention or money. Ruth looked him directly in the eye. I was beaten for spilling water, she said simply. There is no provocation that justifies that. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Helen Morgan was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and accessory to domestic violence. The judge sentenced her to 35 years. She would die in prison. John's trial came next. With Rebecca's evidence and Ruth's testimony, his defense collapsed. He was convicted of aggravated domestic battery, assault, and conspiracy. 15 years. His law firm had already fired him. His professional licenses revoked. His reputation destroyed. The civil lawsuit against me was dismissed with prejudice. The media that had once painted me as vindictive now called me a hero. I hated that word. I was not a hero. I was simply a mother who refused to be silent. 6 months after the trials ended, Ruth and I sat in my kitchen. Same kitchen where she had finally told me the truth. She was drinking coffee, working on her laptop. She had been reinstated at her job with a promotion and a formal apology. Her friends had returned, shamefaced, but present. Mom, she said, looking up from her screen, I have been asked to speak at a domestic violence conference next month. About my experience, about breaking the cycle. Are you ready for that? She nodded. I think I am, because I want other people to know that silence protects abusers. That speaking up, even when the whole world seems against you, is the only way patterns like this end. I felt my throat tighten with pride. You know what I realized, she continued. Helen's family got away with this for 70 years because every generation stayed silent. Because victims were taught that speaking up was shameful. That family matters should stay private. That discipline was love. And then you made a call, I said softly. You made a call, she corrected. You refused to be silent. You used your voice, your knowledge, your power to stop them. You taught me that silence is not safety. Action is. I thought about that night, about watching my daughter fall, about the 30 seconds that changed everything, about the phone call that started the cascade that brought down a dynasty built on violence. I have spent 32 years fighting for women who could not fight for themselves, I said. But that night, I was not fighting as a lawyer. I was fighting as a mother who refused to watch her daughter disappear into a pattern that has destroyed generations. What would you say, Ruth asked, if you could go back and tell yourself something before that dinner? I thought for a moment. Smiled slightly. I would say, trust your instincts. And when the moment comes, do not scream. Do not threaten, just make the call. Because threats are empty. But calls to the right people, with the right evidence, at the right time. Those change everything. Ruth raised her coffee cup, to making calls. I raised mine, to breaking silence. We drank together. Mother and daughter, survivors and fighters. Two women who had faced a system designed to protect abusers and refused to be crushed by it. The generational silence was broken. The pattern ended, and somewhere, I hoped, other daughters were learning what Ruth had learned, that they did not have to suffer quietly, that their voices mattered, that justice, while slow and imperfect, was possible when someone refused to look away. I do not make threats. I make calls. And sometimes, one call is all it takes to bring down an empire built on fear. Thank you so much for staying with Ruth and me through this entire journey. If this story moved you, taught you something, or made you think differently about silence and speaking up, please subscribe to this channel. Your support means everything, and there are more stories that need to be told. Stories of survival, of justice, of what happens when we refuse to look away. Thank you for being here.